Shields and swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. You scared and place, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Hello, minions. I have been on hiatus for a few months now, and the reason originally had to do with technology issues that I was trying to overcome. And I had been working particularly with the Henchmaster in dealing with that, and then some other things popped up that I had to take care of in my personal life. So those things have been taken care of. So I've been talking with the Henchmaster, and lately with Sylvia Rath, my minion, about some things that we're going to be doing in the future. But for now, I thought I would give you just a little something since the hiatus has been so long. And so today I want to talk a little bit about the role of humility in the academic life and the importance of humility. Now, you might think this is pretty ironic coming from a guy who's called Professor Awesome, and that's true. But take what wisdom you can from this and reject what is not appropriate. So I'm going to tell you a story, and it has to do with me as I was beginning my graduate work. So I started my graduate work, and at that time I was in my second week of graduate work, and I was taking class with a guy by the name of Arthur Marotti, the guy who wrote this book. And Arthur Marotti is a guy who does not suffer fools. To give you a sense of it, in addition to this story, he was eventually on my dissertation committee. This is his book that apparently I purchased in 1995, and he did not sign it for me. So he had very high standards. Well, this is my second week of graduate school. I didn't quite know what I was getting into, and so I went to his class. And the first week we dealt with some things, and we had to turn in a paper the second week, a very short paper, 1 to 2 pages. That was all. And we turned in this paper, and I forget what it was responding to. It was probably some sonnet or something. And I really worked hard. I mean, this was the first assignment I was going to turn in graduate school. I really worked so hard on this, on this 1 to 2 page paper that I turned in. And I was very proud of it when I got done. And so the way that his class worked is we would turn the papers to him, and then we would each get a copy of our papers, and then he'd come into class, and we'd sit around this kind of conference table, and one by one he would go around and he would talk to us about the paper we had written, and everyone else there is listening to this. And so he starts going around and talking to people about their papers. Right? And as he's going and talking about the papers, already I had read the other students' papers, and I thought I had put in way too much work in this paper because I saw others had not done anywhere near what I had done. So I thought I put in too much work, but he starts hammering one person after another. And some people get hammered very hard for not very good work. And some people who did decent work, got a pretty positive response from him. Well, by the time it's coming to me, I'm actually getting more and more confident rather than less and less, because I worked really hard on this. And when I'm hearing who he's hammering, I'm thinking, yeah, they really deserve that. I mean, I read their paper and it was no good. They clearly didn't put any effort into it. And so he comes to me, and remember, this is a 2-page paper. He comes to me and he says, I only have one question. Here on the second page, you refer to this as Petrarchan love imagery. What do you mean by that? Well, minions, let me tell you what I meant by that. I meant nothing by that. The truth is, he had used the phrase Petrarchan love imagery, and I knew that there was a poet, Petrarch, so I knew it was a reference to that. But truthfully, I didn't know anything beyond that. And I wrote this paper that had nothing really to do with Petrarch at all. It was about something completely different, and it was in the Shakespeare class. But he had used it, and it sounded smart, And so in a throwaway line, like a fool, I just thought I'd refer to something as being similar to Petrarchan love imagery. I didn't mean anything by it. Just trying to BS my way at this point in the paper. The paper which was 99% not baloney. Of course, what does he zero in on? That one thing. So what should I have done at this point? Well, if it were today, I would understand what I should do. What I should have done is I should have said, I think I didn't really understand what that meant, and I realize now that could you maybe explain to me a little bit more about Petrarch and why my use of it here was wrong, and come away from that maybe being a little smarter than I was when I started. But that was not what I did, because I was afraid of getting found out for not knowing what I was talking about. So instead, what I decided to do was double down. And so my response was, well, what I mean there is that the imagery that Shakespeare uses is reminiscent of the imagery of Petrarch. To which his response is, how so? I realize he's not going to let this go. So what do I do instead? Well, I'm already standing in a hole. Let's dig it deeper. Well, I think if you take the sort of images that we expect in Shakespeare, and we then take those images and we apply them in a certain way, and then we look at the imagery of Petrarch, we apply it in the same way, I think we come to the same sort of conclusions. Like what? He didn't let go. And I, at some point, was so far gone, I couldn't let go in my pride. And I just kept going and going and going. And I am not exaggerating when I say he kept me on the hook for 5 to 10 minutes. I'm guessing it was longer, more like 10 minutes. Until finally, by the time he was done, not only did he know I didn't know what I was talking about, but everybody in the room knew what I didn't know what I was talking about. Probably people in the parking lot knew that I didn't know what I was talking about. And his final response to my essay, his final critique was simply this. No. That was his critique of my essay. And I remember I went home that night and I said, I am in trouble here. I think I'm not going to finish graduate school. I'm in my second week and already I'm getting hammered. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I was already in it and I had to work my way through it. And there are two things that came out of that immediately. One was, you can bet that the next week when I came into class, I knew a whole lot about the poet Petrarch. I knew a lot about him that I didn't know before, and I knew why what I had said was inaccurate and didn't work. The second thing, though, was that I never again said something in a class or in writing that when I didn't know what I was talking about. I never tried to kind of BS my way through some sort of situation. Now, some of you out there who know me might say, oh, you said this and you didn't know what you're talking about. Well, sometimes I'm mistaken, and that, of course, still happens, even to Professor Awesome, but I never knowingly go into a situation where I don't know what I'm talking about and try to bluff my way through it. And so what I did for the rest of my graduate education was whenever a professor would reference Foucault or someone, and I didn't know anything about that, where all the other students were going, and I think, well, I'm the dumbest person here already. So I would be the dummy who would say, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about Foucault. Tell me about that. And probably in the short term, I always looked like the dumb guy in the class. But over time, what that meant was I learned things that I didn't know about. So the times when I would where it would even be a temptation to go on about something when I don't know anything about it or try to bluff my way through something, those times are gone. And this is something that I privately call, I don't think I've ever said this in writing or publicly before, a heuristic of humility. Now, I know heuristic is a big word. What I simply mean is a way of knowing, a way of interpreting the world through or learning things through humility. I once heard someone say that confusion is the first stage of learning, and I think that's true. You only learn something if you didn't know it before. Very often students who come into my class, when they first start my class, they don't know anything about the subject, and they say, well, I'm really behind because I don't know anything about the subject. To which my response is, well, why would that make you behind? If you already knew about the subject, you shouldn't be in this class. You should be taking a more advanced class than this. I think this is a real temptation, though, for all academics. I mean, it's often the case for academics that we are afraid that someone will find out that we don't know what we're talking about. And very often in those cases, we will do the wrong thing, which is we'll try to bluff our way through, or we'll pretend we know what we're talking about when we don't know what we're talking about. And I think that's the wrong response. And I guess what I would say, students, and I suppose to my fellow academics out there, is to say, if you find that you were wrong about something, your first instinct is to do what my first instinct was in that situation, which is to be wrong even harder. I'll show you how wrong I can be. I will be so wrong that I'm going to try to bluff my way through or bully my way through into you believing that what I've said is true. And you know what? You might win that argument, but you lose at life. Because what if I had managed to become the world's greatest bluffer and bluff my way through everything in graduate school? And, well, in the end, I wouldn't have learned anything, or would have learned very little. What I learned would have been incidental. But instead of trying to seem right, the important thing to learn was to try to be right. And if you make that your goal, that I'm going to try to be right, you have to start off with this heuristic of humility, this sort of idea that if I'm going to be right, that means I got to know what the right thing is, which means I've got to learn it myself. I have to approach any subject with a sense that I don't really know everything there is to know about this, that there are other people who know more than I do, who are wiser than I am, who are more prudent than I am, who can tell me more. Now, I'm going to fight for my perspective. I'm going to fight for my reading of a text or my understanding of this issue, and I'm going to fight for them, but I'm always going to fight from them from the understanding that I am imperfect in my understanding of these things. And even if I know more than you, there's very likely something about the subject that you know that I don't know about. Even if I know 99% of things and you know 1% of things, that 1%, I still have to learn that yet. So this is a very kind of general advice to take in to your exams and things like this, and basically take into all things in life, is to say, go into any kind of situation when you find out that you're wrong about something, approach that with humility and decide, I want to learn how to be right, not just how to seem to be right. So, take that for what you will. I'm Professor Awesome. Have a good Thanksgiving, minions.